Hi, we're Poppy and Geoff Spencer, your relational experts, back here with our podcast number 14, Move Past Shame and Guilt. This is our April series. And, last week we had on Aaron Kurtz, who is a personal trainer, very well-respected trainer in our community. And we talked about building your emotional core. So this week we're going to shift a little bit. We're going to get down deeper into those things that kind of hold us back.
Things that hold us back. Oh my gosh. I mean, we're going to redirect our mindsets here, folks.
Yes.
In this podcast, we're going to share tips on how to turn the corner on some of our limiting beliefs, especially the more powerful and often unwanted emotions of shame and guilt.
And we are so excited today. We met Anita Lustrea and her husband, Mike Murphy. And Mike will be on with us next week. But today we have Anita, who is an author, speaker, and spiritual director with some incredible tips for us.
I just love your last name too, Lustrea. What a great last name. We found in our practice, Anita, that a lot of women really easily fall into this place of shame and guilt, which is 4 o'clock on our trademark tool, the emotional clock, that we see a lot of women often go to that spot, and men can often skip right past that and go right to anger, our 5 o'clock setting. That's a more comfortable spot, more action and anger, I think, for men. But, we're thrilled to have you on the show.
And real quick, Anita, I know that sometimes I used to have a habit. I'm really getting much better at it, but I would say I'd say I'm sorry, and even I'd say it when I wasn't even responsible for what had happened. Like it would be raining and our kids wanted to be out in the sun, and I'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry," and it's like, well, yeah, I had absolutely nothing to do with the weather.
I have to catch her off, and Anita, I go, I guess, why are you sorry? You didn't do anything here. That's just life.
So I think we all have some of that shame and guilt. Let's bring on Anita. Welcome, and we're so excited to have you share with us today. Anita Lustrea.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be with you guys, and I can fully identify with everything you've been talking about so far. And I think it probably leans a little bit more, maybe even a lot more, in the direction of women when we talk about the shame piece. At least it's maybe a little bit more out there, like the description, the scenario that you just shared, Poppy, about saying I'm sorry when you had nothing to do with the weather. I think women often are quick to say we're sorry, but it has nothing to do with anything that we've actually done. I know that this relates to men in some other ways, but I think that's a real quick and easy one where, when we're talking about women. But I think it's interesting as you raise the word guilt and the word shame. I thought it might be interesting at the beginning just to say a couple of quick things that might help us look at them. And that is this. Well, first of all, it's probably good for me to say this, that I come from a faith-based background, and specifically, a Christian faith-based background, but fairly broad. But at least that will give you an idea of where I'm coming from. I think these themes and the things that we'll talk about here today and that I will interject are transcendent themes and not really specifically faith-based, even though that might be my background.
Okay.
But so I thought I would say guilt, because those of us who did grow up, I think, in the Christian or Catholic faith, we certainly know that word really well, right? And I'm sure a lot of listeners will identify. But guilt, it's not.
And bear with us, we had a technical difficulty.
Just a little technical thing, but we're Anita Lustrea back. So anyway, sorry about that.
Sorry, Anita, we had a little whoopsie there.
Yeah, sorry. So I just pick up right where I left off?
Yes.
So guilt, you were saying with guilt.
Yeah. So guilt, I think we can all identify with that, and sometimes it's been a negative over the course of our lives. But guilt is about something that we did or have done. Guilt is associated with that. Like, we stole a cookie as a child, or we told a lie. It's that sense that, I've done something wrong. It's not necessarily a bad thing to feel guilt. Now, what happens, what makes it bad, is if we do say, "Oh, I'm sorry," or "I told a lie. This is the truth," or "Here's the cookie back," or whatever. If we keep feeling guilt, there's no need to after we've made something right. But sometimes guilt tracks with us, and we don't let it go once we've righted the ship, if you will. But shame, though, shame is tied in to who we are. So guilt is about something we did. Shame is about the core of who we are as a person. So we might feel shame for things that we needn't feel shame for. Like we might feel shame for being overweight, or, "Oh, my teeth aren't straight. I feel shame over that." Or for me, I can be specific here and say I felt shame over the fact that I went through a divorce, because in my family background, divorce was not a word in our vocabulary because of my faith background. Now, I don't live in that shame anymore, but I had to deal with that and move forward from that. So, you can fill in the blank. I'm sure that anyone listening probably can point to something that they feel shame over, but we actually needn't feel shame, and often it's put on us by others, by something that was said to us, some kind of a family dynamic that we take on that we needn't take on. Or I think of women whose brothers growing up, could be, or siblings, maybe called somebody thunder thighs or
I was going to say weight was one of those things that I think a lot of people might have been poked fun at. In fact, this even crossed my mind earlier today. My dear 94-year-old mother, we were just on the phone with, and she weighs probably all of 105 pounds. She's just a little slight thing. And she's still, to this date, so weight conscious and feels almost can feel a little bit of shame if she puts on, she was excited. She just got back from the doctor. She lost 2 pounds. And I was like, "Mom, I'm not sure that's a good thing.
It's not a good thing.
You're a toothpick, but someone called her chubby when she was a little girl, and she's never been able to let that thing go. It's just, it's a hard thing to let go.
And she's in fabulous health and is awesome, mind, body, spirit,
Yeah, and I bet so many can identify with it. And so I think when we have those messages that then we take on as shame, it manifests itself in all kinds of ways. That was a great example, but it can manifest itself in addictions, perfectionism.
Right.
We fear. That's I certainly have had that as a piece of shame that I've experienced in my past.
And just even like, excuse me, but body image. When I first moved here from the Midwest to Florida, I was really like out of just completely surprised at the number of cosmetic surgeries that are performed from head to toe on women's bodies here. Not so much men, but definitely women. And I was wondering, like, what shaped that? What is it that these women are really needing to want to do that? Geoff always teases that I have all my original factory parts, and
we both do. We're very proud of the fact it's all original factory equipment, And
having nursed 4 children, I can attest to that part. There will be no breast enhancements or anything on my part, but I just wondered, does shame and guilt play into that too with the body image?
Oh, 100%. And I think, I often think about it. And I've said to friends, I'm grateful for the gray hair while I do cover it up. What I say is this: I'm grateful for my wrinkles and gray, because those were hard-fought things, and I consider that to be a piece of wisdom gained over the course of the years. So I think in our culture in general, we elevate youth, and we do not revere people in older age, when just about every other culture in the world, it's the reverse.
Absolutely.
Or certainly they revere their elders.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's interesting, and if I just might interject a quick thing here. When I was an instructor of psychology at Ringling College of Art and Design, we did a theory. We tested a hypothesis. and we took the ageism perception that all of my young students had, and we put it all out there, and it was not pretty. Many of the things that they used to describe the elderly in our city, in our county, in Sarasota County, is the oldest demographic in the nation. And I said, okay, so we're going to set out and see if we can't shift our perception of the elderly. And with a 6-week program where we exchange storytelling and art making with elderly at the Senior Friendship Center, we completely reversed that perception to the point that many of the students were in tears, feeling shame and guilt.
A lot of shame and guilt about how they were
for having that initial perception and embraced the elderly and revered them, as you just said. And they said, "Oh, you remind me of my granddaughter or my grandson," and it was a really beautiful, powerful experience. But it took a 6-week unit to be able to do that.
It's hard to imagine when you meet a lot of these people and you look at them and they're a wrinkled up old man or woman in a wheelchair, and there's not much to the eye until you have a conversation. It's like, oh, you used to be one of the
red tails.
Or actually it was the Flying Tigers. You were a Flying Tiger in World War II. And then another woman I remember meeting was one of the high-stepping dancers. What are they called? The Rockettes.
The Rockettes.
Yeah, thank you.
And another one was this tiny little British woman, and she goes, "I used to dance for the Queen." For millions of years. And it was like, okay, so these are like royalty from...
so you just get stunned when you hear their actual story of who they were and what they what they have to offer. It's just, they just don't, physically you don't see much in a casual glance. And and as you're so true, in our society, we just push those people aside thinking there's not much to them.
So tell us a little bit about, you're a wonderful former radio host, right? In Chicago. Give us a little bit of your background before you moved here.
Sure. Which I just got to say, I loved that illustration, that experiment you did with your students. How phenomenal was that?
It was.
That was just beautiful.
Thank you.
And actually, it's kind of gotten me thinking, and I'll answer your question by saying, my husband and I are new to Sarasota. We have lived for years in Chicago, over 30 years in the Chicagoland area. And when I first moved down here, and I'm 56, so I'll just put that out there. So I'm older than 40, but I'm not 80 yet. But so I'm in this range. And I moved down here, and it was a little disconcerting for me. I found myself, at least in my mind, having some real ageism thoughts. Feeling prejudice come out, and I finally realized that a piece of it was, oh wow, I am looking at my future, and I need to transform my thinking, because some of these folks are incredible. They have lived amazing lives. They have so much to offer, and that's who I want to be moving forward. Now, yes, we all can become someone who's just kind of a lump and not really living with purpose or continuing to learn, etc. But I really had to take a look at that. So that's a little piece of my personal transition to Sarasota. Absolutely loving it now. And I hosted for many years. I've been in radio for 30 years, but hosted a live radio talk show for 16 years. It was syndicated on a network, and we were on 250 stations, but headquartered in Chicago. Okay. And so I loved that life, and I felt like it sort of ended too soon, and had to kind of reinvent myself. And so that's a part of what's happening. My husband and I are moving down here. Some of that is going on, and we moved near my aging parents because they really could use support right now. So it's a combination of why we relocated.
Wonderful.
Well, we understand every bit of what you just said. That parallels a lot of our lives.
So, and you talk about the radio, and you used to have people call in, right, or write in, or share their challenges and their obstacles with you. Could you share a story or two, obviously keeping confidentiality, about how that people may have released that shame and guilt? and you could
Sure.
bring some relief to them. I mean, our listeners
Sure.
would like to know, okay, so how do I get rid of this
great.
shame and guilt?
We all got it now. How do we get rid of it?
Yeah, right on, right? Well, I'll tell you what, I love the illustration, and maybe you two have used this as well. But I often think about those things that we feel shame over as a beach ball that we are trying really hard to keep underwater. And if you've ever played around with a beach ball, batting it around in a pool, and then you try and hide it from someone,
Yes.
you're trying to sit on it, you're trying to hold it under. It takes a lot of effort to hold it under, and once it pops up to the surface, it's a big relief. You no longer have to expend all this energy to keep it hidden. And I think a lot of times this is what happens in the shame picture. We're working so hard, we're exhausted by trying to cover up those things that we feel shame about. And it's interesting to me, I could almost feel it and sense it happening as someone would either send an email that they wanted us to read on the air and address a question, or they would call in and kind of anonymously tell a little piece of their story. You could almost feel the shame lifting as they expressed what it was that they had felt shame over, what they had carried for so long. And I'll tell a specific story of someone who was a part of a seminar, similar to me, had gone through a divorce, and they went to this seminar, had met the speaker at maybe the halfway point, and the speaker said, "Hey, would you mind coming forward, in the next session, and just give 2 or 3 lines about what you felt about your divorce?" And so this woman shared the story that when the host or the presenter of the seminar introduced her, gave her name, and asked her to come up front, it's a small group, about 30 people. And she said for the first time she was introduced as a divorced person, because this is kind of a session that was about that.
Okay.
And she felt the shame just roll off her back just because of someone actually stating that she was a divorced person and she was coming to tell her story. And she realized that her story, just 2 or 3 lines, whatever the host asked her, was going to help other people. And it was like that shame evaporated, bringing it out into the open.
So can I ask you a question about that? That's great. It's beautiful. Is a part of this is just acknowledging the shame and guilt?
Yeah.
Is that just, saying, because is it things like you said, has it just been hidden forever that they never acknowledge it to themselves or anyone else?
I think it's bringing it out into the light, acknowledging it, telling someone. I think we struggle to develop these deeper relationships where we feel safe with other people and able to tell them these things.
Right.
So I do think that's a huge element. I think once we tell someone even a difficult piece of our story, one that we may have felt shame about, often the response is, "Oh, you too?"
Yes.
And that's so important. Right?
So there's a belonging in that release, and it's relief. It brings relief to these people. Right?
Absolutely, yes.
I know, both Geoff and I had been divorced twice each, and I know certainly it's especially my first divorce and my second one. It was like I'm not even going to look at the stigma of divorce. I'm just going to keep moving forward and, keep revisiting, obviously, getting some coaching like we offer right now, but to help people through that. And so, sometimes we even sort of, feel very humbled about saying this, but we're really good at helping people navigate that thought. If they've already turned the corner and they say, "Hey, I think I might need to get divorced or I might need to separate," we can help them through that process. We have step-by-step strategies, which we'll talk about next week when we talk with Mike Murphy.
We're going to talk about that with your husband, I think.
But I love that.
He'll be great.
That shame and guilt. So this woman immediately felt relief, and I think that was really. Are there any other steps that we have to move people beyond shame and guilt?
How do you neutralize this thing?
Well, I think, certainly getting things out into the open is one big piece of it. I think with shame also, I think it's something that, because it attacks us at our core, I think a lot of times, and you guys can speak to this as well, Poppy, I know from your experience, in your specific field and talking one-on-one with people, that often we need some help to move there. It's not always something that we can do on our own. Well, I made mention of how important it is to have deep, lasting relationships, people that are safe, that we can share some of these inner thoughts with. Unfortunately, the reality is we don't always have those kind of relationships, and we have to seek out a therapist to help us move through these things. Right.
And the other thing is, even when a separation is occurring or a divorce occurs, many of those long-standing friends, some of them fall like dominoes because they, and then there's shame there, for like, well, I thought this person was my friend and they've taken, sort of allegiance with my ex, and now what?
Or they just don't want to be around you because you're divorced now. That's,
right.
There you carry a stigma of some sort that they want to throw on you, and or else sometimes that stigma of divorce gets a little too close to home because they might not be in a very comfortable spot in their own marriage.
Right. We found that with many of these clients that they've lost friends because as they've made the decision to move on with a divorce for whatever reason, the family friends, the couple friends, feel really uncomfortable saying, I don't want to look at my own relationship.
I don't want that to bleed over into my life here,
Right.
Well, and I can tell you a specific story. As I was going through my divorce, I had been part of a small group study, and this was a church-related study, faith-based, and as my marriage was falling apart, this group just sort of distanced themselves from me.
Wow.
And I started a new study in my home, which I became a single mom, so it was great because I needed to be able to be at home in the evening, so all the other women were able to come and meet at my house. What I discerned between the two groups is one of the groups was filled with women who had not had any real trauma happen in their lives, and they felt just what you said, Geoff. They felt like I was a little bit of a pariah. They might, they got too close. It might happen to them too. It might be touching,
infectious.
The other group of women, yes, exactly. The other group of women had all had significant, deep, difficult things happen in their lives. They had compassion. They had empathy. They reached out to me. It was a totally different scenario. I was not at all a person that made them frightened. They were very safe people, and they walked with me in a beautiful way as I moved forward, going through this painful time in my life. And I think that that's a wonderful thing to raise, and to not be put off by it, but to realize that depending on where other people have been or have come from in their lives, they may or may not be able to handle what you're going through, and to realize that and move towards someone who has been there.
Yes, it's so true. And basically it comes down to, and as we mentioned earlier, we have this emotional clock tool that we use, that we trademarked, a communication tool to help people when emotions build up and flooding occurs, which means that the emotions are overriding any kind of organized thought or practical way to look at something.
Especially in that moment of anger where you're elevated and your ears just shut off, basically.
And they have studies that show if somebody's in either a shame and guilt situation where emotions are really high and the heart rate actually elevates above 100, it's nearly impossible to hear what someone else is telling you. And we liken it to also a water experience. Emotions are water, but we liken it to be like talking to someone underwater. If you ever did that as a kid, you try and figure out what they were trying to say. That's what it's like in kind of in a peak of an argument or a highly charged discussion. It's really hard to process what someone else is saying. And so that's why I think we have so many communication missteps in our personal and professional lives, because people just aren't processing. They're not active listening,
I want to go back to a word that you used too, that I think it's very important to being around people that are going to be supportive of you. The empathy word, that's one of the things that, Poppy and I always find it interesting when we talk to people about different items in our lives, the things that have taken place. And you mentioned, you can mention certain things like I had, I don't know if I mentioned this to you when we were together. I think you heard me mention this. I lost my brother in 9/11. And it's amazing when I mention this to people. It is like one of these audio meters. You can just watch. If the meter doesn't even like register at all, like you just get a glazed over look in their eyes, you realize that the person doesn't have a whole lot of understanding and empathy, and they have a hard time even hearing what you just said, versus that person with great empathy will literally, I've seen people like double over, like you just punched them in the stomach, and they get this, just look about, they almost just a painful awareness of what you just shared. And so it's always important to be around people with a lot of empathy when you are hurting, and surrounding yourself with people that can not add to that shame and guilt that you already feel, but to help take it away from you.
Yeah.
I love that. Yes.
And real quick, though, just to add on that. So why is it that some people just sort of like wash over that? Do you think it's because they don't want to feel badly about something? They don't, maybe they don't have the social skills and poise and grace to say, oh, I'm so sorry.
Or it's like you said, they've never had anything like this in their lives, and they just can't even begin to, they don't want it. And
it's a virus that might spread, so something bad might happen to me, so I'm going to just step away. I mean, it's all fear-based, essentially. The foundation of that is fear.
But I think you're onto something. I mean, I think you're right, though, because I think it can be people that maybe don't have the social skills. I'll agree with that. But I think back to I don't know which one of you said this, but I think it's people that have not yet had that deeper experience of pain in their lives, and so, and I'll equate it to myself. The whole shame piece for me translated into a fear piece, but also perfectionism. I tried to do everything perfectly. And in fact, I grew up with a parent who told me I was perfect. And so I tried to live into and up to that expectation. So when my marriage failed and I was no longer perfect anymore.
And yay, let's celebrate the imperfect you, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So when I wasn't no longer perfect anymore, two things. It was a huge relief to me. I no longer had to live into that model of perfection. But also, for the first time, one of the things that I noticed as I was going regularly to a therapist, for the first time, I had empathy and compassion, and then empathy. And I really hadn't had it before then, because I was pretty much perfect. But that was what was spoken to me and what I tried to live into. And so I do think that some of it is when people haven't had a big inciting incident, whatever that may be, trauma, difficult struggle, whatever. I think that their capacity for empathy is much less.
Right. And you know what? You just said something. When the moment you released that perfectionism, striving, that compulsion, if you will, to be perfect, you kind of opened up the space for empathy to enter in, right?
Yes, indeed. And I am forever grateful. So here I am, someone who divorce wasn't in my vocabulary, and I sit here forever grateful that I went through a divorce, because I am no longer the same person. And I am so grateful that space was opened up. you said it so well. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, this we could talk to you for hours and hours here, but where can our listeners find you?
Sure. Thanks for asking. You can find me online at AnitaLustrea.com. And Lustrea is with an EA at the end. AnitaLustrea.com. I have a podcast called Faith Conversations, and you can find out about it there. It's all on my website.
And your books. How about
you
your
have
books?
A couple of books, too?
Yeah, I do. Thanks for asking. I'm not always thinking about that. I've written a book, What Women Tell Me, and I've edited a couple of devotional books and co-wrote a novel more recently called Shades of Mercy. And you can find all of those at my website as well under the books tab.
Okay, and those are on Amazon, right?
They are, absolutely. That's the place to go these days.
I like the subtitle of What Women Tell Me. So say that because it's pretty awesome.
Sure. I do too. It just meets me where I am. So What Women Tell Me, Finding Freedom from the Secrets We Keep.
Well, this whole shame thing we're talking about, all this stuff you keep bundled up inside that you don't share and you let it go. And it's just a wonderful thing to be freed of that, huh?
Absolutely. You can preach on that one all day.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And again, we're Poppy and Geoff Spencer,
Relational Experts, and you can find us at relationalexperts.com. And it is on Facebook at Relational Experts and on Twitter we're the Relational A Team. We'd love to hear questions, comments. Please, give us feedback from this podcast with Anita. And we'll see you next week with her husband, continuing our Shame and Guilt series in April. And we're going to be talking about parenting and divorce. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Anita.
Thank you so much.
Bye.